All right. Today we are going to begin with a story, or look at a story, that if you have a squeamish stomach, you might need to cover your ears during part of it, okay? Oftentimes people say the Bible's boring. I don't want to read the Bible. There's nothing interesting to read in there. I beg to differ. When we look at this story, you're going to see that there's some interesting stuff in the Bible, if you just look for it. In this account in Judges, we see the first of 5 accounts of national deliverance for Israel. Now, these accounts are meant to sicken us at Israel's defiance, or their turning away from God and how they turned their backs on him and their disobedience. But they also help us to celebrate God's deliverance of his people. Some may look at this story as we discuss it and say, well, that's all well and good, but we can't go out and assassinate people today. And you're correct. We can't do that. I'm not advocating that at all. We can't do that. But we do need some Ehuds in our world today. We need people who are going to be willing to take a stand for the Lord, no matter what it may bring to them. We need militarily Ehuds, we need political Ehuds, we need spiritual Ehuds. Let's take just a minute to consider some background information concerning Israel leading up until this point. Joshua has led the Israelites into the promised land. They've defeated their enemies. God has given them the land. But there are still small pockets of resistance throughout the land. The major strongholds have fallen, yet there are still small groups who are holding out. Joshua and the other leaders who were with him at the time have all passed away. They're no longer with Israel at this point. They have entered the promised land, and it's now that they don't really have anybody leading them, and they're turning their backs on God. During this time, there was no king, and people did as they saw fit. Judges 21:25 sums it up. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Every time I read that verse, I can't help but think, doesn't that sound familiar? Pretty much like today, isn't it? The nation was in total chaos at this point. Religious, social, political, and moral principles had all disappeared. The Israelites worshiped Baal. They worshiped Asherah. They broke the first and second commandments of God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. We see the cycle of sin and deliverance that became the norm for Israel during this time. The same cycle was repeated over and over and over and over again. First, the people would turn their backs on God. Then God would allow them to be taken over by another country. Then they would get tired of that. They would cry out to God for deliverance, and God would deliver them from their enemies. From their enemies. Yes, that was God's form of judgment on them. We see the cycle starting in Judges 3, starting at verse 7. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan, that guy right there, king of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came on him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave that guy again, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years, until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Now we see here people doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. They turned their backs on him. They began worshiping Baal, began worshiping Asherah. The Lord allows the king of Aram Naharaim to come in and take over Israel. After 8 years of this captivity, the Israelites cry out to God, who sends Othniel, who delivers Israel from the hands of the king of Aram Naharaim. But as we see, it didn't last very long. After 40 years of peace, the people once again turn from the Lord, and the Lord allows them to be taken captive again. Judges 3, starting at verse 12. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword with about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it in. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." The king said to his attendants, "Leave us," and they all left. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand and drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace." They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their lord fallen to the floor dead. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Seirah. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. "Follow me," he ordered, "for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." So they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed no one to cross over. At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong, not one escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. Now, we may again look at that and see the repeated cycle of the deliverance, turning against and then the deliverance of the Israelites. And we see when they saw what they were living under, they turned back to God and sought his deliverance from these people. Now, my question when I read that section is this: why did it take them that long to ask? They were captives for that long, and then they asked God to deliver them. Why didn't they do it beforehand? We live in a strong, we need to live strong for the Lord, because the Lord needs examples in this lost world. Ehud was an example. We need to be the examples today. Today I'd like for us to focus on Ehud, and I'd like for us to make some observations from this account that should help us in our walk with the Lord, if we will let them help us. First of all, Ehud showed great courage and faith in God at a time when others of his day were not. Sunday school teacher had told the class the story of David and Goliath. He embellished the story with great detail. He animated with gestures and with movements, and he concluded with all the details of how little David killed Goliath with a rock from his sling. Then he asked the class what lessons they learned from that story. One little boy piped up in the back of the room and said, "I learned how important it is to duck." I wonder how many of Ehud's contemporaries were doing just that. They were ducking. You know, they saw how hard the Moabites were. They saw the pain and discomfort that they were inflicting on Israel. And all they did was go find a place to hide to wait for somebody else to come and deliver Israel from the Moabites. Ehud could have done the very same thing. He could have found a nice comfy spot to go and sit and relax until all this was over, but he didn't do that. Ehud showed great courage and faith in God at a time when others were not. Look again at Judges 3, 12 through 14. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel, getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him. Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Now, like I said, my first question when I see that is, why did they wait for 18 years to cry out to God? Why didn't they do that right away as soon as they saw what was happening? The best answer that I can come up with is, sometimes it's just a whole lot easier to live with what you got rather than it is to try and rock the boat. Aren't we that way sometimes? It's a whole lot easier just to live with the sin in our lives than it is to try and get it out of our lives. If we're honest with ourselves, that same principle holds true with us in our lives. But the Israelites reached a point where they could take it no more. Something had to be done. So they cry out to God. God hears their cry, and he sends a deliverer. He sends Ehud. Now, we need to understand that Ehud had to make some drastic changes from what the evil nation was saying was acceptable at that time. They were worshiping false gods, and they were doing whatever they wanted to do. Ehud was being called to take a stand for the Lord, and he did. Others of his time were ducking and allowing things to continue as they had been going. But Ehud shows great faith in God and great courage, and he takes a stand for the Lord. Let me share a poem with you. One night I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some stranger prints appeared, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? Those prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they are too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired and fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand or leave their butt prints in the sand. How many would take a stand like Ehud did for the Lord today? Was this an easy thing for Ehud to do? Probably not. But he showed great courage, and he showed great faith in the Lord. He stepped up to the plate, and he hit a home run for the Lord. How about us? Are we ready to step up to the plate and hit a home run? Second thing that we need to look at in Ehud's life is that he creatively used what God had given him. Ehud was left-handed. Now, there are several different explanations as to why this is a possibility. Some believe that maybe he was handicapped in some way, couldn't use his right arm, so he had to use his left arm. Others believe that maybe he was just born left-handed, which was considered it wasn't the common thing of the time. And he's just born left-handed, so he never used his right hand, just used his left hand, just like we use, I say we, probably some lefties out there, just like I use my right hand. We got at least one back there. For some reason, I figured that, Keith. I don't know why. Like I said, for whatever reason, he used what God had given to him. He was left-handed, and in this particular case, he used that to his advantage. Remember the story? Ehud and several others were sent to take tribute to the king. They had come to see Eglon. They made their presentation of gifts to the king, and then they began to leave. As they were heading out, Ehud turned to the king and said, hey, king, come here for a minute. I got a message for you, but it's a secret message. I can only tell you, nobody else. Don't you think that made the king feel pretty important? A special message just for me. Okay. All y'all get out of here. I need to talk to this man. So the king sends the servants out. Then he and Ehud go into his private chamber so he can share this private message that he has with them. Can't you picture him when they get in the room? I picture Eglon just sitting there kind of looking behind the doors and behind the curtains, making sure nobody else is around. So he's the only one that hears this special message that's for him. Then Ehud slowly reaches to his right leg. Remember now, if they were right-handed, the sword would be over here. It's on this side. He reaches to that right leg, and he draws that sword out. So Ehud reaches, pulls it out, and as Eglon turns around, he takes that sword and drives it into the king's stomach. And as it says there, it went all the way in. Eglon was a fat man, and it swallowed up the whole sword. Now, my sick sense of humor, I can picture Ehud saying, okay, you can keep the sword, and then moving on the way there. Ehud walks to the door. Can't you see him going over to the door, cracking it open a little bit, sticking his head out, making sure there's nobody in the hallway? And he steps out, closes the door, locks it behind him, and just kind of strolls out of the palace like nothing's happened. Once he's outside, his servants, Eglon's servants, come and wondering where he's at. He's been in there a long time. We probably need to check on him. They go over there, and the door's locked, and they basically say, well, maybe he's in the little king's room, the bathroom. And he's relieving himself in there. So they give him some privacy. And I love the terminology in the scriptures. Did you catch that? They waited till the point of embarrassment. When is the point of embarrassment? But they waited. And they got to a point where they realized, okay, we need to check this out because something's up here. That's when they get the key. They open the door. They go inside. And they find the king who is dead. If it were not for Ehud's left-handedness, he would not have been able to sneak that sword in there the way that he did. Because they would have searched him on the other side, because that's where everybody carried their sword. But they didn't search him on that side. He used what God had given him to benefit Israel. He used what God had given to him, even though some may consider it a handicap, or it may have been a physical handicap. He used it to benefit Israel. What about us? What handicaps do we have that can be used for the glory of the Lord? Maybe it's your family heritage. Maybe you don't come from the best named family. Maybe people don't look up to you, or they look down at you. Maybe that needs to be used. Maybe you think that you're just too ordinary. There's nothing special about you. You don't stand out in a crowd. You don't get picked out first when there's a job that needs to be done. They don't come looking for you. Maybe it's that you don't make quite as much money as somebody else. Maybe you can't go out and buy whatever you want, whenever you want. Or maybe it's that you have an actual physical handicap. Maybe you're in a wheelchair. Maybe you have a bad hand. Maybe you have a bad leg. Whatever it is, maybe you have a physical handicap that, if you let it, could get in the way of your serving the Lord. Ehud was chosen to bring the tribute to King Eglon. He was a man who could be trusted. He was a man who could be depended on. We need to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to fall into the trap of thinking that God can't use us because of something in our lives. Judy Squaller was born without legs, and she has been walking, she has been walking on artificial limbs since she was 10 years old. When she was born, the doctor told her father, "Your daughter is going to live, I'm sorry to say." But at age 10, Judy was able to ride a bicycle that her father had modified. At 16, she was able to drive a car that had been equipped with hand controls. Social workers had told her, don't even bother thinking about college, but that made her even more determined. She graduated from the University of Illinois with undergraduate and graduate degrees. Now she and her husband have 3 beautiful daughters. At a dinner in Washington, she said, "I'm convinced that this old world needs handicapped people. God designed it that way. Handicapped people make a unique contribution." Ehud was just an ordinary person used by God. He used creatively what God had given to him. Are you using what God has given to you, or are you just sitting back and watching others do the work? One Sunday morning in 1865, a black man entered a fashionable church in Richmond, Virginia. When communion was served, he walked down the aisle and knelt at the altar. A rustle of resentment swept through the congregation. How dare he? After all, believers in that church used the common cup. Suddenly, a distinguished layman stood up, stepped forward to the altar, and knelt beside the black man. With Robert E. Lee setting the example, the rest of the congregation soon followed his lead. The next observation that we make from Ehud's life is that his example inspired others to rise up. Sometimes it takes only one person to motivate many to righteousness. My question is, will you be that person? Ehud was willing to go on the attack first, but then he blew the trumpet, and all of Israel joined the battle, routing their enemy. Judges 3, starting at verse 26. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Seirah. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. "Follow me," he ordered, "for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." So they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed no one to cross over. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. Andrew Johnson was impeached. A senator from Kansas was the deciding vote, and he voted not to remove Johnson from the presidency. One song can spark a moment. One flower can wake a dream. One tree can start a forest. One bird can herald spring. One smile begins a friendship. One hand clasp lifts a soul. One star can guide a ship at sea. One vote can change a nation. One sunbeam lights a room. One candle wipes out darkness. One laugh will conquer gloom. One step must start each journey. One word must start a prayer. One hope will raise our spirits. One touch can show you care. One voice can speak with wisdom. One heart can know what is true. One life can make a difference. You see, it's up to you. Madeline Murray O'Hara got prayer taken out of schools. One person standing up for what she believed in. For a long time, students were told they couldn't take Bibles to school until somebody stood up and said, no, that's not true. And they can take their Bibles to school. The Ten Commandments have been removed from schools. And I love their reasoning. You know why they were removed, right? What I heard anyway. They always said they removed them because they were afraid people might obey them. We can't have that happen. But there's a judge in Kentucky who refused to take him out of his courtroom. And the ACLU was suing him because of that. Do you believe God can do great things through you? Do you believe that God can use you and that you're valuable and that you can make a difference in this world? Be willing to take a stand for the Lord and inspire others to stand for him too. What would have happened if Ehud had not done what he did? What might happen if you don't allow the Lord to use you to make a stand for him? Examples in the lives of believers, they're vital. And what better example do we have than the example of Ehud? Here was a man, just an ordinary person, just like you and me. There was nothing exceptionally special about him, but he was used by God. And what great lessons we can learn from his life. First of all, Ehud exhibited great courage and great faith in God. Even though people were thinking and living one way, Ehud lived for the Lord and was used by the Lord. How about us? Even though the world looks at life one way, do we stand against the world and live for the world, for the Lord? Another observation that we made from Ehud's life is that he creatively used what God had given him. Ehud was left-handed. For whatever reason, he used his left hand. So he used that to his advantage. He snuck a sword in and was able to kill the enemy of Israel because he was not searched on the side where people normally carry their swords. What about us in our lives? Do we creatively use what God has given us? Or do we just sit back and allow others to do the work? You know we're going to have to answer for that one day. And then finally, we saw that Ehud's example inspired others. Ehud stepped up to the plate and served the Lord. Then he went out and called Israel to join him. And they did. What kind of example are you setting for the Lord? One that would please him, or one that you're going to have to explain to him? We have great opportunities. Let's not blow them. We may look at the story of Ehud, and we may wonder what the judges of Israel have to do with us today. But we need to realize that we need deliverers today, just like Israel needed them. There are Christians out there. There are Christians here in this building who need deliverers to help them deal with temptation and with sin. There are non-Christians out there who need delivering. They're helplessly lost without Jesus Christ as their Savior. Which one of us is going to go to them and help deliver them from that sin? There's a great need for deliverers today. Jesus Christ is coming back, and once he does return, it'll be too late then. Be an Ehud. Take a stand for the Lord today and help deliver lost souls to him.